tennis and then this morning session, and like, whoa, I'm just sore, very sore glutes and quads and hamstrings, but it's good. It's good.
Good soreness.
Yeah, it's good soreness, not bad soreness, but it's been a high exercise load the last couple of days.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's you can push a lot harder than we can all push a lot harder than we think, and then you get sore, but then you get, like, if you keep that intensity, then you get less sore again. I got sore from the movement session that I ran.
Oh,
Like literally dynamic stretching, etc., made me so sore.
Oh.
Like in the muscles where I'm like, I haven't worked my hamstrings. Why are they so sore? Because I was doing dynamic stretching with them, and obviously you stretch out your muscle fibers. That's how you break them up, and made me sore, more sore than the workouts I've done. So yeah, we got. Well, we'll just get into it. Get started. We had a
couple of questions.
Well, a few. We have. I'm going to be honest. We're not going to pretend that we had a lot of questions because we haven't heard from many people. Let's not be one of those like, oh, I've got this question a lot. But we do have topics that we know people are always wondering about. I have some things I want to ask you, and I have been chatting to one of our members. We're obviously not naming people here, but today who just had a few things that I'm gonna. Maybe we'll start with that, actually. Maybe we'll start with something that we brought up, or she brought up here. So it's basically, well, it might not be so much about like naturopathy or anything. Well, it will be a little bit. So what she's asking me, because I said to her we could help, obviously, with nutrition, if she needs anything more like that, because a lot of people are now, with lockdown, we're not like, maybe not eating in the routine that we normally do. Maybe it's better. Some people might be eating better because they have the time. A lot of people make it an excuse to eat whatever, right? So it's like, oh, it's whatever, because it's lockdown and we don't have to, start drinking at lunchtime. And I don't know, maybe not anymore. Hopefully people aren't still doing that 6 months in. So the basically what she's a she, said, she's got our old recipe book and our old style from my challenges, etc. And then she's asking if we're still doing that style. So I asked her depends, why does she need a diet, right? So it's obviously different reasons. So I don't want to assume that everyone wants weight loss, because it's not always the case, but so she would like to lose the weight that she gained from having kids. I believe she's got 2 kids. Yes. But so this is what she wants to lose weight that she gained from having kids that she put on, but also in general would just want to eat healthier, change eating habits for life, etc. Right? I hope then to modify for children and one's got allergies. So that could be something that's be good for you. I said for her to actually get in touch with you about that one, because I don't want to get into that. It's not my expertise. But in terms of this question about losing the baby weight, what do you say to that? Because I have my opinion on it, and but we want to hear obviously from you.
Yeah, look, I think, as with everything, there's no sort of simple answer. It's always sort of multi-layered. The first thing I sort of talk to people about, especially, my female clients who are mothers, is about being kind to yourselves and having realistic expectations. So I guess depending on how old this, woman's children are, I mean, if they're really young and during lockdown, it might not be the time to be focusing on the weight loss. It might be about focusing on building that foundation of, good habits, because she said, she wants to change things for good. So, I mean, weight loss is a combination of, it's 80% diet, 20% exercise. So but really the biggest thing is about consistency. So coming up with a plan and sticking with it for a period of time. I think that's the biggest thing when people come to me and they say, I've been trying to lose weight for ages and I haven't shifted anything. what I tend to find is people will do things for 3 to 6 weeks, not see any results or not see the obvious results that they want to get. And then they go, oh, it's not working. They go off the rails a little bit. And then a couple of weeks later, like, okay, I'm going to knuckle down now. And now I'm really going to do it for good. So the biggest thing is about coming up with a plan that is realistic and achievable, and then sticking with it for a 12-week period. And also having those realistic expectations about how much weight you're going to lose. I think for some people that weight can shift really quickly. But for some people, it might be 12 weeks before they see even a couple of kilos shift, and that kind of thing as well. So I think firstly, coming up with a plan is really important. And then secondly, looking at, are there other factors that might be hindering that progress? So for example, with lockdown, I sort of say to a lot of people, this might not be the time to focus on serious weight loss during this time where, there's a whole bunch of factors and stresses and things like that are making weight loss a bit harder. Like I said before, now might be the time about laying the foundation for good habits, and continue to build on that. And you can then step things up. So sort of making it a multi-layered approach for that long-term success. Because if you don't, you could crash diet, sure, you could put yourself on 1,200 calories a day, and probably lose the weight, but is that sustainable for the long term? So I think about coming up with a long-term plan that evolves over time is really important.
Yeah, no, obviously. So what my response to her was that usually I don't recommend necessarily, because a lot of people come to us and say, "Oh, I just want to lose." Like, I would be lying if the most common goal with coming to Big Five, if I said that it wasn't weight loss, because I think that's most people at the start, right? It's an aesthetics goal usually. People want to look and feel better, right? So, but I usually say, like, what's your goal? And then, I used to be, and this is not this person we're talking about now, but when you used to be 65 kilos, I said, okay, when? And it's like, oh, when I was 21, and you're 42 now. So it's possibly not the goal you should be going for. And I think it's the same with having had kids. You might not, you're never going to look the same as you did before, because the body's changed, right, from having kids.
Yeah.
And you got to cut yourself some slack with it. And I'm not saying you should get lazy with it. You should still aim for improvements, etc. But I find it like probably a few kilos above what you think you want to be is something to aim for first, right?
And that's what I meant about from the start, about firstly being kind to yourself, and secondly about your expectations. Again, because I work with mainly women in their late 30s and early 40s, and they're talking about, oh, I want to lose weight, and they'll talk about a specific number, that I want to be 60 kilos. And I often ask them the same question, well, when was the last time you weighed 60 kilos? And like, oh, when I was 21. And I mean, we have to, be realistic about how our bodies change as we mature. And the other thing too is that when you were 21 and weighing 60 kilos, you might not have been working out then as well. So your body composition could have been really different. And so as we age and as we incorporate exercise into that as well and change our body composition, we might get to a point where we weigh 70 kilos, but our body fits the same clothes that we did when we were 21. So it's also just about being realistic about like how that's going to change, how your muscle composition is different, and your fat composition as well. And then also taking into consideration with women, the influence of hormones, of your stress hormones as well on your body composition. And that's what I mean about during COVID, when stress levels for a lot of us are a bit higher, that expectation around fat loss just might not be achievable, because when stress hormones are high, that's just going to block that kind of fat loss in the same way. And that's what I mean about that, building a foundation, get the habits in a great place, get that consistency going. And then when you come out of the stressful situation, you can start to, increase things and work towards something a bit more higher.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also not saying that you can't do it. It's like maybe it's not the right time. But I think so. My suggestions here was like, it depends on what kind of person you are. So I haven't talked too much. We've given her before the normal generic plan that we have, the simple one where you basically using the hand measurements, etc., and your recipes from our recipe book. But now I'd like to know, before I give her more suggestions, like, so my easy suggestion is like, well, just be mindful of what you put in. Like, if you usually have 6 wheat bix for breakfast, maybe you cut it down to 3, or maybe, you know, maybe you skip your snack in the morning. Maybe you're mindful in the afternoon when it's 3:30 and you go for those bickies in the cupboard. Maybe that's where you start, but not one day, right? You said 12, you got to have consistently of that. Or some people really like measuring and tracking, and then we can come up with a plan like that. So it's just about working out. Some people think they like to track, but when they realize how much they have to actually weigh every single thing, measure everything, it's a lot of work.
It's boring.
It's boring, yeah. I mean, can be done.
Absolutely. And look, I do, any time that I plateau, which is one of the other questions that we had, was about what do you do when you plateau? I go back to tracking in great detail. And that, again, if you're not seeing results, if you're like, well, I feel like I've been really good and I'm not getting results, that's where I go, okay, you need to document what you're eating and how much you're moving. And I think the thing too is that, especially during lockdown, you know, every single one of my clients, when I talk to them about what they're eating, they're like, I've been pretty good, but yeah, I guess the wine's crept up a bit, or I'm having a bit more ice cream. And you've got to remind people that across the course of the week, you know, 5 or 6 glasses of wine, you know, 2 or 3 serves of ice cream, an extra chocolate bar or whatever, those things are going to add up. And they're going to add up in terms of your calorie, you know, intake across that week, and that's going to hinder your results. So it doesn't have to be. It depends on where you're at right now and what's in line with your goals. You don't have to get super strict, but as you said, it could be about not having that second glass of wine, you know, having a smaller scoop of ice cream and just once a week, dropping a wheat bix or whatever.
To be honest, the wheat bix is probably the worst example, but I use that for her. But it's just to an example, like what can you? I like to actually ask people when they get to me specifically. It's like, okay, well, take a photo of everything you eat. Just click it up when you eat it. You don't have to send it to me, but then you can look at the end of the day or the end of the week and say, which picture could I have deleted here? And remove from that, like maybe it is that glass of wine. Like, did I need 3 glasses of wine? I could have had 2. And maybe that's because a glass of wine might be 150 calories, depending on how big your glass is, right?
Glasses, yeah.
If you have an urn. But I think those sort of things is like, oh, it's just 1 glass, but 150. But if that's 3-4 days a week, then all of a sudden you're over your calorie. If that's exactly, you might be over your calories by 500 calories that week, and it's not much, but it creeps up. And then at the end of the year, you've gained 5 kilos, right?
Exactly. And then same thing, then if you're, you know, you're incidental, maybe you're not getting your steps in and you were before, again, it all adds up together. So it's not just one little thing, it's like accumulatively. You know, I think the biggest issues for people at the moment with COVID is that a lot of people have found that their incidental exercise has decreased. You know, they're not feeling maybe as motivated to exercise daily. So you've had a decrease in, you know, your calorie burn, and then you've had that just very slow, insidious increase in calories across the course of a week. And the two combined, fine, for some people that's not going to be creating weight gain, but it's definitely going to be a hindrance for weight loss. So you've got to look at those little changes that you can make, and sometimes that's all it is. And within a week you're like, wow, I'm feeling heaps better, I'm noticing my clothes are looser, I'm going to be motivated to step things up a bit more. So starting with the basics and then building up from there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think, and with the tracking, like you said, you can do it, and it's I've done it at periods, and then realized, you know, like I don't really like doing it. I really don't enjoy it. I find it tedious, and then if you don't do it properly, you might as well not do it. You might as well just eyeball it, right, and say, hey, this looks like too much. I do like everyone has a calorie, like a maintenance calorie number, which is not a specific number in my head. It's a range of something, right? This is what you need to hit, and it's not necessarily the same. It depends on what you do, like you said, with stress. And but at the end of the day, you have to be in a calorie deficit really to lose weight. So that's why those calories, we talk about the wines, it might be your coffee, that's a milky coffee and it's 120 calories, and then you have 3 of those a day, and then all of a sudden like you're in a surplus instead of a deficit. But you didn't really eat more, you just drank more fluids or some more calories.
Yeah.
So it's really important to know calories, even though we don't have to track them necessarily.
Exactly. It's about understanding. I talk, I don't necessarily, for most of my clients, I'm not advocating counting calories, but you need to have an awareness of the fact that everything you consume has calories. And it could be as simple as, things like just getting your macros out of whack and having a bit too much fat. And because, they all, every a gram of all of these contains the same amount of calories, but if things start to get into higher volume, it's going to tip that balance. So I try and get to people in that headspace around eyeballing things, so just understanding that something is a certain amount of calories. And then once you get that perception, it's like, okay, I know that if I have a third milky coffee, I've had, too many calories. And you don't have to obsessively track it. It's just like, I know I'm in excess, as opposed to, like fastidiously counting every calorie, because it does get really tedious.
I think also a lot of people, you have a coffee, but a lot of people, and I'm like, you have something with the coffee, right? So it might be something that's added on there. It's not the coffee that you have a little bicky or cookie or whatever it might be. Maybe you have a muffin, and obviously then it's really adding up with the calories.
Yeah.
Not saying not to ever have it. I'm just saying it might not be something you have every day with your coffee.
Exactly. And it's just about being in line with your goals, because it's like if you're fine, if you're feeling fine, you're not worried about your weight, you're feeling on track, or you're just going to deal with it later, then you don't have to worry about these things. But if you're kind of looking at, why am I gaining weight or why am I not losing weight, these are the things to kind of shift. Or it's that kind of mindless snacking. I find a lot of people talk to me about snacking while they cook dinner, and I'm like, what? Why are you snacking? You're about to eat a full meal. And then they cook a full meal and they're like, well, I just made this, I better eat it, even if they're not that hungry. And again, that could be fine, not much, 20, 30 calories. But for some people, that could be a whole handful of nuts or, half a packet of crackers that they've just mindlessly, as they're doing something, putting in their mouth. So it's also about that connection. When you're mindless about what you're eating, when you're not connecting with what you're eating, again, it's going to accumulate as well. So just connecting with what's going in your mouth every day is going to help shift those kilos, really.
I myself, I do love snacking in the afternoon, and it's usually bickies and cheese, or like not very healthy stuff. Like, well, I'm not saying it's, but it's not the best choice. Or I have some hummus but I mindfully do it because I don't eat breakfast most days, so I can have that meal, which is a meal later, because I enjoy having that more than breakfast. Some days I like breakfast and I eat breakfast. I'm not too strict with it. But I just know that if I have breakfast and I have that, and then I'm still going to enjoy those in the afternoon. So then I choose to just eat later in the day, which makes it easier. So it's whatever, but that might not work for everyone, because it's skipping breakfast or eating later in the day. It's not something that's you just do one day and it's fine for most people. Like for me, it took a while to get used to it. And it was when I thought that intermittent fasting was the best way, right? But now I realize it's just really easy to cut your calories. There's no magic with it. It's just helping me to eat less in the day in total. For me, about intermittent fasting, like or skipping meals or whatever you want to do, it just makes me feel more energized in the morning than if I eat something, especially if I eat something carb heavy, which is usually what it is. It's usually bread. Even if I have eggs, it's bread, or it's cereals of some kind. I feel a bit heavy for the rest of the day. I don't like it. So, but each to their own. Like you can eat breakfast and still be in a deficit.
Well, that's exactly. And it's just about, again, trying something and giving it a period of time to see if it's successful. So, for myself, I don't do well with a 16-hour fast. I find that I'm really, really hungry I just can't, and I can't concentrate. It doesn't give me good energy. But if I fast for around 12 hours, I feel really great. So I have breakfast around 9 o'clock, in the morning. And that for me is like the optimal. Some days, I might not be hungry and I'm like, cool, I'll go till 10 or 11 o'clock and I'll get a longer fast in. So, but the biggest thing is to give it a crack, set a timeline for it and go, I'm going to do this for 3 weeks and see how I feel and what the best response is. And I would say during that time, if you're finding that you're feeling really terrible, like energy's low, your blood sugar's dropping, you can't concentrate, it's probably not for you, and that's okay. And then you can just come up with something different. And for you, that might be having 3 larger meals, so getting your calories spread across 3 meals and cutting out the snacking. And in a way, that means you're actually fasting in between meals, and that can be really beneficial as well. So fasting there's so many different variations that can benefit people. So it doesn't always have to be this magic number of 16 hours of fasting and eating in an 8-hour window. So it's about what works for you. And also too, if you don't want to fast, you don't have to do it. So it's not this kind of like, oh, everyone should fast. It can be really beneficial. For some people, not so beneficial. And that's where you're just going to try something different. So yeah.
Every person technically fasts when they're sleeping, right? Like that's why we call it breakfast. So breakfast, right? Breaking the fast, and whatever time that is, it's when it's done for. It's just it's another tool to use. For some people it works, and for some people like yourself, it's not so good because you don't enjoy it. And if you're not going to stick to something, and saying that though, I eat breakfast. I'm not like strict on it. I used to be. I've been strict on everything. I've been strict on 6 meals a day. That worked. I've been eating 2 meals a day. That also worked. It's fantastic, right? It's just a calorie deficit. And then I worked out what worked best for my lifestyle and for how I was feeling. So obviously the morning works well because of the schedule we have in the gym. It's usually working start. I'm not going to eat before 5:30 in the morning. I just don't I don't want to spend time in the morning to eat, so I eat later, and then it just works well with my lifestyle. And sometimes I eat earlier, so there's no magic with it. It's just how you feel, and it could be a good tool for some people, but for some not.
Absolutely. And again, it's a consistency as well. Stick with it for a period of time.
And just because I do fast doesn't mean I'm always in a deficit, right? It doesn't mean that I can still in my window of eating eat too much easily. Those hot chips.
You could break your fast with hot chips and a burger, and all of a sudden you're in an excess. So of course it just depends on what you're doing. So that's the thing too. It's about being realistic. Some people think that the fasting means that they can then eat whatever they want, and that doesn't work either, because if you're not getting results with fasting, again, I'd still be looking at what are you eating throughout the day, what's happening in that window when you do eat, and is there an excess there, or the macros aren't right, or that sort of thing.
I think let's touch on some of the topics you and I came up with to talk about that are questions that you usually get, or you get a lot of it. With one of these, so we talk bloating, and is this more common for women, or is it the same for men and women? Bloated tummy, right?
Yeah, that's actually, that's hard to say, because I guess I predominantly work with women. So I couldn't say that it happens more in women than men. It's just more that my clientele is more women than men. And then I would say that the men that I see tend to have digestive issues. So they're coming to me about the bloating as well. I think bloating is a really tricky one. It's very subjective. For some people it's obvious. So you can actually see, they've got a distended stomach. So it's about actual, swelling of your abdomen. But for other people, it's a feeling. I feel bloated. It feels full and round. They've done studies where they've actually kind of measured what's happening in that person's stomach and intestines, and found that there's no difference between the people that said that they were bloated and the people that said they weren't. So often it's about perception. It's not to say that it's not real, but it's a very, very individual kind of thing to experience and then sort of express. I think, you know, it happens for a range of reasons. I mean, we can also just get bloated when we've eaten too much food, you know, or we eat when we're full. So it's about differentiating between, did I just eat a really massive meal and I just feel a bit puffed out? Or do I have, you know, some form of digestive issue where I'm really, you know, feeling distended, feeling uncomfortable, and those kinds of things, and then what's happening there. So it's probably one of the number one things I see in my work.
But there's obviously a big difference between, like, if someone has IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, it's very big difference from someone who's just bloated from eating, you know, too much, or someone feeling, there might be just, I'm guessing, foods that certain people are a little bit less intolerant, less tolerant to, that makes them feel a bit bloated, and it could that be, well, could it be lactose intolerance, even though you're not? Could it be gluten intolerance, but even though it's not a celiac thing? So a lot of people probably don't know that they have intolerance to some certain foods.
Exactly. And I guess that's the thing, when someone's coming to see me and they're complaining of bloating, I ask them, when does it happen? So are you waking up with a flat stomach and then at some point in the day you're getting bloated? Is it happening after a certain meal? Is it happening with certain foods? You've got to kind of do the detective work. It could be something like, I had a client who was like, you know, I'd given her some recommendations about how she can improve her diet. She was having smoothies. She was going great. And then she was like, no, I don't know what's happened in the last couple of weeks. Like, I've started to feel really bloated after breakfast. And that's when she was having a smoothie. And I was like, okay, well, tell me about your smoothie. And like, have you added anything new to it? And she's like, oh yeah, you know, I got this new powder, this maca powder. And, you know, and ever since then I've been bloated. And I was like, well, okay, well, there's the new ingredient. Take that away, see how you feel. And, you know, and we'll see what we go from there. And look, she takes out just one new ingredient, the maca powder, and is not bloated anymore. So it could just also be because it's had a healthy label, and for whatever reason that doesn't work well for you, and that's just making you a bit bloated. So you've got to connect the dots. When am I getting bloated? And documenting, again, that mindfulness as well, paying attention. What am I putting into my mouth? Have I all of a sudden, you know, I used to have an omelette for breakfast and now I'm having toast every morning for breakfast, and then having a sandwich for lunch and then pasta for dinner. Are you just eating maybe just a bit too much in the way of carbs, and that load is causing a bit of bloating there? So you've got to kind of peel back the layers of it to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach, and I've never really had to try it myself because I don't really have an that I know. There's nothing that really bothers me, but I know people who say you just cut something out for a while and see if it makes a difference. It could just be, well, you find that little ingredient like that powder or whatever it might be. For some people, it might be that you stop having dairy for a little while if it's if you feel bad from, because if you drink 2 or 3 coffees a day, you might have milk with your cereal in the morning and you're feeling, it might be the thing, right? So okay,
exactly.
Sorry, you're cutting out there a bit. I think we're back. Now, the next thing we talked about was simple, or did you want to say something more about bloating?
No. We'll go down the rabbit hole. We'll never come back.
That's right. Like there's a whole different, like we could possibly just talk about that for a whole podcast. But so we talked about simple meals, and I find simple meals, and I want to spend a little bit on this, simple meals and meals timing. I will say with simple meals, for me, I'm a very simple man. Like when I'm on a mission to drop some weight, I eat the same thing. I just eat the same thing because then I know. that this is working.
Yeah.
Like I know. So, but for a lot of people, and this is my opinion, and I want to hear yours, obviously. A lot of people, I see, they want to lose weight, but they want every meal to be like a gourmet bloody dish that is the best thing they've ever tasted. Um, and to me, sometimes it's just fuel, right? And I'm not saying you should eat disgusting things, because I eat things that I like still. But it's a lot of sometimes when I'm in that mindset, I can like tuna and rice. Like it's it's fine for me. Like, but so simple meals. Like, what's your look on that? What's your view on that?
I mean, look, I'm definitely one of those people who I mean, I don't want to eat a gourmet meal every time, but I really love flavor. And I also, whilst on the one hand, I can kind of eat the same thing every day, I kind of need to have a bit of variety. And for me, flavor to the max. But it's about, you can still have, it's about creating a skeleton, your foundation of that meal. So thinking about, so you're using those hand portions is great, or using the plate. So I kind of talk about, a quarter to a third of your plate being protein, a quarter of your plate being some kind of, complex carbs if you're going to have them, and then the rest being filled up with plant foods. So lots of like low starchy, low carb veggies and that sort of thing. And then from there, you can build it up a bit more. So then you can, if you want the flavor, you can add, a dressing or lemon juice and some herbs and spices. So from there, about building it up to get that flavor and variety, or the gourmet feel, it's about, again, kind of understanding, I guess, sort of calories comes involved, because if you're going to add like a dressing or toppings, they can actually then kind of, get you off track because they've got too many calories. So it's about kind of understanding how many calories something's going to be, and then how you can kind of circumnavigate that with flavor. So for example, I'm a big fan of dressings because I find that they can really add kind of flavor, but I'll only use something like half a tablespoon of oil, and then the rest of it's going to be lemon juice and fresh herbs or pesto, and those kinds of things, or a dollop of yogurt instead of mayo or something like that. So, coming up with your skeleton of your meal and then building up onto it from there is definitely the way to go. But simple's fine. Like, a lot of people ask me, is it okay to eat the same thing every day? And I say, yes, definitely. The only thing to consider is, if we talk about our gut microbiome, what our gut bugs love is variety. So all I say is eat the same thing every day. So let's say your lunch is tuna and rice, and you're like, that for me just works so well. All I would say there to kind of mix up that variety is have a rotation of different vegetables that you add for it. So maybe one day it's carrot and broccoli, maybe the next day it's like a grated coleslaw with carrot and red cabbage, and then the next day it's green beans and spinach. So trying to have just a little bit of rotation, and again, still that foundation of your meal, but just rotating certain ingredients to get that variety that your gut bacteria like.
Yeah, it's I'll have to admit, I haven't had tuna and rice for a very long time, but it's but I would eat it if I feel like, if I felt like I'm in that period of where I would want to lean down, I'll do it. I also know that I don't have to eat that to lean down. It could be something much nicer. With the dressings, it's interesting. I remember going to this nutrition course years ago, and there was a girl there who she seemed to think that she knew more than the teachers, but she was mentioning, where we talked about dressings to put on to make food more interesting, and she's like, oh yeah, but people don't understand how many calories, this many calories in dressing. I think if you start drilling down to those small things, that little dressing that you add, I don't think that's your problem, right?
No.
If you want, that's not going to be a problem. You got to look at the bigger picture. And yes, we can start cutting small things out to make a change, but it's not going to be that's your problem, right? That's not going to be your problem.
Absolutely. And the thing is that, like, it can make the difference, like adding a dressing or a dip or something like that to add flavor. That can be the difference between staying on track,
yes,
or eating food that's really plain and boring to you, and you're like, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. This sucks. So for me, it's like, you've got to, again, it's got to be in line with your goals, and then in line with how long can you, or a dip, you know, I often use like hummus or like a beetroot dip with nut butter. I usually talk about serving it as a tablespoon. So it's just like, again, you're still eyeballing it. You're not pouring a bottle of dressing onto your food. You've still got to kind of know the portion size.
Yeah.
But the addition of that can really change, you know, how enjoyable that is. And if it's enjoyable, you're going to want to eat it the next day, and you're going to stay on track.
Yes. So we seem to have a little bit of an unstable connection. However, I think we heard most of that. The only thing that we might have missed is you said you add a spoonful. So you're talking about dressing or hummus or something, and just don't like throw out on you know, massive amounts of it. But if it's a little bit
Or a
for
jar.
taste.
Or a jar.
Yeah.
That looks about. Yeah, that looks about right. I mean, definitely. Again, you know, it doesn't have to be about like measuring every single thing. You know, I know what a tablespoon looks like, so I can pour out tahini onto my roast veggies, and I know that I've served myself a tablespoon. For people that are right at the beginning or who don't feel confident with it, just dig out the tablespoon and you know, dig out that portion. And again, like, I agree, it's not that, like, unless you are literally having a half a bottle of dressing on something, it's not the addition of the dressing that's going to be the issue. It's going to be your portion sizes. Maybe realistically your carb portion, so your serving of rice or your serving of sweet potato, that's actually too big. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe your protein content is too much or too little. It's the other stuff. Or maybe it's not your main meals, it's your snacks. So I think, you know, again, it's all about getting back to basics, you know, figuring out like, and also with that rotation of simple meals, it could be like, okay, meal menu plan. I've got 6 meals that I just have on mission, and I know roughly the calories or the macros of those 6 meals, and then I can just rotate them through the weeks. And again, that means that you feel really confident because you're on track, but it's not too boring. You're able to have that kind of nice variety in there as well.
I think that's a really good point, because that's why I eat the same things when I'm sort of dieting, right? Because I know that I know how big it is. I know it's like, that's what it is, right? But I find when you do, well, if you add things like you said, you might be more likely to stick to it if it tastes a little bit nicer. So and it could, you're not cutting the dressing out, you're cutting part of the portion out. I think that's a really good point to say to people, because an interesting thing that we see when we do our challenges, etc., when we look at people's nutrition, and yes, our challenges, because it's the 28-day challenge, usually it's quite aggressive in the beginning, right? It's but we still it's interesting with people who's gained weight, but then when we tell them to eat as much food as we tell them to eat, they go, I can't eat this much. But they've obviously eaten more calories because their food's not as you know, like we say, a lot of vegetables and a lot of protein, and they might have been eating more, you know, hot chips, for example, which you can have like this much instead of that much. So it feels like so much more. So a lot of the time we see that people like, and sometimes we get them to take photos and send them in, and we're like, looks good, but you need to double it, right? They're like, oh, I can't eat that much. Well, you can, and you're still gonna be, but people get scared of, people get really scared of the amount. They think they need to be on 1,200 calories because that's what the generic plans tell you, because it works. It works for weight loss, right? But you'll end up in too much of a deficit, losing muscle mass. And
exactly. And the thing I always say with a heavily calorie restricted diet is a nutrient poor diet. You literally cannot get your micronutrients on 1,200 calories a day. Like if you're a female and you need 18 milligrams of iron, even if you're eating 2 steaks a day, and but because your calories are restricted and you can't have extra veggies and all these things, you won't get your daily iron intake. So it's you've got to again look at that, the longevity of doing this, finding something that is feeding your body in the right way, so that you don't come out of a weight loss journey and fine, you've dropped 15 kilos, but suddenly you're anemic, or you've got no energy. Then you start turning to sugar, and then you undo all of that good work.
I was, well, there's someone we know, I will be careful how I say, that went on a diet, I think it was like 800 calories a day. And I'm not sure if that was the actual prescription, but that was basically what she was eating. And everyone's like, oh, you look great, you've lost this much. But then as soon as she went off it, she gained a lot of it back. Not a lot, not all of it, but some of it. And the risk with it, you don't get the nutrients, but from a training perspective, from my side, you don't have the energy to train properly. And also you're not getting enough calories to maintain muscle mass. And we really don't want to lose any muscle mass, right?
Exactly. So that's right. You come out of it, you've dropped the weight, you've lost muscle mass in addition to fat loss. And again, that can be far more damaging. You're not going to get the benefits from the exercise. You're not even going to want to exercise. Like 800 calories a day, my God, I wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. Like,
no, it's like, and it's fine to possibly do it some days, you know, but I don't know.
But that's in line with that fasting picture. Like there's, you know, that kind of thing too. That's a different kettle of fish. If you're consistently eating 800 calories a day for 12 weeks, you're going to walk out of that malnourished. It's just not, it's not a good.
No, picture. It's not good for the long term, right? Like I will admit to I save my calories for the weekend, so I eat better and less during the week, because usually, like, you're never going to lose weight in one day, and you're also not going to gain any weight in one day. Like one good meal, one bad meal, it's not that one day, it's the whole consistent in it. And we usually talk about weeks at Big Five, but it's also then months and years. Like it's not, so it accumulates. Or so for me it works well, because, and for most people this is probably to me a better approach, because then their lifestyle doesn't suffer so much. If I say you have to eat 1,800 calories every day, it doesn't really work. So maybe we cut it down to, well, let's say 1,600 or something, but then have a little bit more on the weekend or the day that, you know. And you can play around with that, I think, as well. If you know you have an event coming up and you might not eat so much the day before or the day after, and just but that's a whole different story than talking from a nutrient perspective. So like that's purely like if you want to lose weight, right? So you know more about the other stuff, the microbiomes and the gut, all of that stuff. I'll leave that to you. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about coffee. However, I'm going to leave that for next week when we chat again, and not about, like, we talk a lot about coffee, but this is more about how coffee, because there's obviously no calories in coffee if you don't add milk, barely any calories. There's always some, right?
Yeah.
But what are the negative effects or positive effects can coffee give you, etc.? But we'll talk about that next week, and because I drink a lot of it, and I need to know, and I think a lot of people are the same as me.
I think so. I agree.
So we'll chat to you again next week. Thanks, Renee. Thanks so much.
That's great.